I awoke drenched in sweat, the echoes of my screams still reverberating in my mind. My room was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of the streetlights seeping through the blinds. Heart pounding, I struggled to catch my breath, reassuring myself it was just a nightmare. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something strange. My surroundings felt unfamiliar, distorted, as if reality itself was fraying at the edges. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the lingering terror. The room, my sanctuary, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Shadows moved independently of any light source, slithering across the walls like living entities. I pinched myself, hoping to dispel the surreal sensations, but the pain only confirmed my consciousness. Was I awake, or was this another layer of the nightmare? Determined to ground myself, I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen flickered to life, but instead of the familiar icons, it displayed a series of cryptic symbols and distorted faces, all staring directly at me. My heart raced faster. I stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over my own feet, and headed for the door. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, a twisted labyrinth that defied logic. Every step I took seemed to echo with the whispers of unseen entities, mocking me, luring me deeper into the abyss. I saw glimpses of familiar faces in the shadows, friends, family, all with twisted, grotesque expressions. They beckoned me to join them, their voices a cacophony of fear and madness. Desperation clawed at my sanity as I ran, hoping to find an escape from this waking nightmare. Exhausted, I collapsed against a wall, the cold surface grounding me momentarily. My eyes fluttered shut, and I felt myself drifting, praying for release. When I opened them again, I was back in my bed, the room bathed in early morning light. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. Something was still wrong. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the nightmare had followed me into the waking world. Determined to break free from this cycle, I ventured outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. But the world outside was no better. The streets were deserted, buildings loomed at unnatural angles, and the sky swirled with ominous clouds. My reflection in a shop window stared back at me with hollow eyes, mirroring the dread that consumed me. Reality was unraveling, and I was trapped within its shifting layers. In my desperation, I returned home, collapsing onto my bed once more. Exhaustion overtook me, pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I awoke, the sun was shining brightly, birds chirped outside, and everything seemed normal. Tentatively, I reached for my phone. This time, the screen displayed the familiar time and date. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, but deep down, a nagging doubt remained. Was I truly awake, or was this just another layer of the nightmare, an illusion crafted to keep me trapped? As I navigated through my day, every shadow, every whisper, kept me on edge. The line between dream and reality had blurred irrevocably, leaving me forever questioning the nature of my existence. To this day, I live with the uncertainty, never knowing when the next layer of the nightmare will unfold. Each night, I dread closing my eyes, fearing what horrors await me in the darkness. And each morning, I question the reality I wake up to. The nightmare within a nightmare has become my perpetual reality, an endless cycle from which there is no escape. I was born into darkness, my earliest memories a tapestry of shadows and whispers. My name is Elias Blackwood, and this is the story of how my life became a conduit for the unspeakable horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. This is not a tale for the faint of heart, but one that must be told, for the nightmares made flesh that I have endured cannot remain hidden forever. My childhood home was an old Victorian mansion, perched on the edge of a dense forest that locals called the Cursed Woods. From a young age, I was plagued by nightmares, visions of grotesque creatures clawing their way out of the darkness, reaching for me with skeletal hands. My parents dismissed my cries as mere childhood fears, but I knew better. The house itself seemed to breathe, its walls pulsing with a malevolent energy that seeped into my very soul. One night, when I was just 7 years old, I awoke to find my bedroom door ajar. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of decay. As I peered into the hallway, I saw a figure standing at the end, shrouded in shadows. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and I could feel its gaze pierce through me. Frozen in terror, I watched as it slowly began to move towards me, its footsteps echoing like the tolling of a funeral bell. As the years passed, the nightmares grew more vivid, more relentless. I began to hear voices in the walls, whispering my name, urging me to join them in the darkness. Objects would move on their own, and I would wake up with scratches and bruises, evidence of unseen hands that tormented me in the night. My parents, concerned for my sanity, sought the help of doctors and priests, but none could offer an explanation for the horrors that haunted me. One particularly harrowing night, I awoke to find myself standing in the basement, surrounded by ancient, dusty tomes and strange symbols etched into the stone floor. In my hand, I held a knife, its blade glistening with fresh blood. I looked down to see my arms covered in deep, self-inflicted cuts. The pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the terror that gripped my heart. I had no memory of how I had gotten there or what had compelled me to harm myself. The house had taken control of me, and I was powerless to resist its malevolent influence. As I grew older, the nightmares began to bleed into my waking life. I would see glimpses of twisted, contorted faces in the mirrors, hear the anguished cries of lost souls in the dead of night. The house seemed to feed off my fear, its walls pulsating with a sickening, organic rhythm. I became a recluse, unable to escape the horrors that surrounded me. Desperate for answers, I delved into the history of the mansion. I discovered that it had once been the site of unspeakable rituals, performed by a cult dedicated to summoning eldritch beings from beyond our realm. The leader of the cult, a man named Lucian Blackwood, was my ancestor, and it was said that his spirit still lingered within the house, bound by the dark forces he had sought to control. I found journals and letters detailing the rituals, describing in grotesque detail the sacrifices and bloodshed that had taken place within these very walls. It was then that I realized the truth. I was the final piece of the puzzle, the key to unleashing the full power of the entities that Lucian had sought to summon. The house had chosen me, marked me as its vessel, and there was no escape from its grasp. Determined to break the curse, I sought the help of a renowned occultist named Dr. Thaddeus Crowley. He arrived at the mansion with an air of grim determination, armed with ancient tomes and talismans designed to ward off evil. Together, we conducted a series of rituals to cleanse the house, to banish the spirits that haunted me. For a time, it seemed as though we had succeeded. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the whispers in the walls ceased. I dared to hope that I might finally be free of the nightmares that had plagued me for so long. But the darkness was not so easily defeated. One night, as we were performing the final ritual, the house erupted in a cacophony of screams and unearthly wails. The walls seemed to close in around us, and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. Dr. Crowley's face twisted in terror as he was dragged into the shadows, his screams echoing through the house. I was left alone, surrounded by the horrors that had been unleashed. Realizing that I could not rely on anyone else to save me, I steeled myself for the final confrontation. Armed with the knowledge I had gleaned from Lucian's journals, I prepared to face the darkness head-on. I carved protective symbols into my flesh, anointing myself with blood and ash. The pain was excruciating, but it was a small price to pay for the strength I needed to survive. As I descended into the basement, the air grew thick with the stench of rot and decay. The symbols on the floor glowed with an eerie light, and I could feel the presence of the entities that Lucian had summoned. They watched me, their malevolent eyes gleaming in the darkness. With a primal scream, I began the final ritual, invoking the names of ancient gods and demanding that they release me from their grip. The air crackled with energy, and the house shook with the force of their rage. Shadows coalesced into monstrous forms, and I fought with every ounce of strength I had left. I do not know how long I battled the darkness, only that when it was over, I was left alone in the silent, empty mansion. The walls no longer pulsed with malevolent energy, and the whispers had ceased. The house was finally at peace, but I was forever changed. I bear the scars of my ordeal, both physical and mental. The nightmares still haunt me, but they are a reminder of the battle I fought and the evil I overcame. I cannot escape the darkness that dwells within me, but I have learned to live with it, to harness it. This is my story, a tale of horror and survival, of nightmares made flesh. And though the house may be silent now, I know that the darkness is never truly gone. It waits, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike when least expected. And so I remain vigilant, ever watchful, for the nightmares that haunt me are the price I pay for my defiance. Pizza Delivery is a scary story about a man who decides to share his food with the family who live in the apartment above his own. A man was injured in a car accident and had to stay at home for a few weeks until he recovered. His wife was working and wasn't able to take care of him. It was too painful for him to go outside, so he had to spend most of his time in the apartment. For first couple of days, it was easy. He had a lot of things to do. But after a few days had passed, he became very bored. One day, he was watching TV when he happened to hear footsteps and children's voices coming from the apartment above him. He wondered why the children were home, because the schools were not on holidays yet. The next day, he heard the same footsteps and children's voices. It sounded like there were two children playing. The next day, the man grew even more bored and didn't feel like cooking lunch for himself. Instead, he ordered a pizza delivery. As it turned out, he ordered too much, and when he finished eating, there was still one whole pizza lying untouched on the kitchen table. He remembered that there were some children living in the apartment above him, so he decided that they may like a free pizza. Upstairs and, willing to do something kind, he decided to take the pizza to them. The man had never met the family who lived in the upstairs apartment, but he rang the doorbell anyway. There was no answer, even though he heard someone moving about inside. He rang the bell again and noticed that someone was peering at him through the peephole. "Who is it?" called a faint woman's voice from behind the door. The man explained that he lived in the apartment below and had some leftover pizza left from lunch and wondered if the family wanted it. The door opened slightly and the man could see part of the woman's face through the gap. He noticed that it looked unusually dark inside the apartment. "Thanks, but we don't want any," said the woman coldly. "Maybe your children would like it," replied the man. As soon as he said this, two children's faces lined up below the woman's face. The door was open, still just a crack. The children stared at him. The three faces were forming a line. "Okay, give it to me then," said the woman. A hand reached out through the gap and snatched the pizza box. The man just stood there. The three faces were still staring at him. Then the door slammed shut and he walked away. Something was bothering him. He felt a chill run down his spine. The image of the three faces was burned into his mind. He walked faster and reached the elevator. The faces were forming a line, he thought to himself. He pressed the button and waited for the elevator to arrive, forming a line, vertically, one on top of the other. He pressed the button again and again, but the lift still did not come. Something was seriously wrong. The faces. He began quickly walking down the stairs. Faces lined up, on top of each other, that's impossible. He frantically ran down the stairs. No bodies. Finally, he reached his apartment door. Just hands holding up the heads. Safely inside his apartment, the man picked up the phone and called the police. He tried to explain what he had seen. When the police arrived, they searched the apartment upstairs and found the bodies of the woman and her 2 children lying in the bathtub. Their heads were missing. They had been decapitated with a saw. According to the autopsy, they had been dead for 3 days. The police found the woman's husband hiding in a wardrobe. His hands were covered in blood and he had gone completely insane. He kept trying to convince the police officers that his wife and kids were still alive. They found an uneaten pizza sitting on the kitchen table.